The autumn rain drummed steadily against the windows of Vanderbilt Children's Hospital in Nashville, Tennessee, creating a melancholic rhythm that seemed to match the heavy hearts of those within its walls. In room 314, 8-year-old Emma Grace Thompson lay propped up against stark white pillows, her small frame dwarfed by the hospital bed that had become her second home over the past 6 months. Emma's blonde curls, once vibrant and bouncing with each step she took, now lay limp against her pale cheeks. The harsh fluorescent lights cast shadows under her bright blue eyes, but they couldn't dim the spark that still flickered there, a testament to the fighting spirit that had carried her through countless procedures, medications, and sleepless nights since her diagnosis with cystic fibrosis. "Mama, can you play that song again?" Emma's voice was soft, barely above a whisper, but it carried the weight of a child trying to find comfort in an incomprehensible world. Sarah Thompson looked up from her worn paperback novel, the same page she'd been staring at for the past 20 minutes, without reading a single word. At 34, Sarah had aged years in the months since Emma's diagnosis. Her auburn hair was pulled back in a messy bun, and dark circles under her green eyes told the story of countless nights spent in uncomfortable hospital chairs, watching her daughter fight a battle no child should have to face. "Of course, sweetheart," Sarah said, reaching for her phone with trembling fingers. She scrolled through the playlist she'd created specifically for these moments, a collection of George Strait songs that had somehow become Emma's anchor in the storm of her illness. The gentle strumming of "I Cross My Heart" filled the small room, and Emma's eyes immediately brightened. She had discovered George Strait's music during one of her first extended hospital stays, when the elderly patient in the neighboring room had been playing country music softly through the thin walls. Something about the genuine emotion in Strait's voice, the storytelling quality of his songs, had resonated deeply with Emma's young heart. "I cross my heart and promise to give all I've got to give to make all your dreams come true." Emma began to sing along, her voice gaining strength with each word. Despite the oxygen cannula in her nose and the IV lines trailing from her small arms, her voice carried a purity and emotion that would have impressed any seasoned performer. Michael Thompson entered the room just as Emma reached the chorus, carrying 2 cups of coffee and a paper bag from the hospital cafeteria. At 36, Michael was a construction foreman who had spent his life building things with his hands, but he felt utterly helpless in the face of his daughter's illness. His broad shoulders, usually squared with confidence, carried the weight of medical bills, insurance battles, and the constant fear that lived in every parent's heart when their child faces a life-threatening disease. "There's my little songbird," Michael said, setting the coffee down and kissing Emma's forehead. His rough, calloused hands were gentle as he smoothed her hair. "You're sounding better every day, Princess." Emma beamed at her father's praise. "Dr. Martinez says singing is good for my lungs, Daddy. It's like exercise, but fun." Dr. Elena Martinez had indeed encouraged Emma's musical interests. The pulmonologist had seen how Emma's breathing improved during her singing sessions, how her oxygen saturation levels stabilized when she was focused on the music. More importantly, she had witnessed how music lifted Emma's spirits during the darkest moments of her treatment. "That's right, baby girl," Sarah said, settling back into her chair. "Music is medicine for the soul." As the song continued to play, Emma closed her eyes and sang with a passion that seemed impossible for someone so young and so sick. Her voice, though affected by her condition, carried an authenticity that came from a place of deep understanding. The understanding that life is precious, fragile, and beautiful all at once. The afternoon wore on with its familiar hospital routine. Nurses came and went, checking vitals, administering medications, and adjusting equipment. Emma's favorite nurse, Jennifer Walsh, a woman in her late 20s with kind brown eyes and a smile that could light up the darkest room, always made time to listen to Emma sing. "You know, Emma," Jennifer said as she checked Emma's IV, "I've been a nurse here for 5 years, and I've never heard anyone sing with as much heart as you do. You have a real gift." Emma's cheeks flushed with pride. "Miss Jennifer, do you think George Strait would like my singing?" Jennifer's heart clenched at the innocent hope in Emma's voice. "Sweetheart, I think George Strait would be honored to hear you sing his songs. You put so much love into every note." That evening, as the hospital settled into its nighttime rhythm, Emma lay awake, staring out her window at the Nashville skyline. The city lights twinkled like stars, and somewhere out there, she knew, was the man whose music had become her lifeline. She didn't know that just a few miles away, in a recording studio downtown, George Strait was working late into the night, unaware that his music was providing comfort to a little girl who needed it more than she could ever express. "Mama," Emma whispered into the darkness, "do you think we could make a video of me singing? Maybe we could send it to Mr. George." Sarah's heart broke a little more at her daughter's innocent request. "We'll see, baby, we'll see." But even as she said it, Sarah was already thinking about her husband's smartphone, sitting on the bedside table, and the possibility that maybe, just maybe, they could give their daughter this one small dream. The next morning brought the familiar symphony of hospital sounds, monitors beeping, carts rolling down hallways, the soft conversations of medical staff beginning their shifts. Emma woke to find her father already in his chair beside her bed, scrolling through his phone with a furrowed brow. "Morning, Daddy," Emma said, her voice hoarse from the night's breathing treatments. "Morning, Princess," Michael replied, looking up with a forced smile. He'd been reading about experimental treatments, clinical trials, anything that might give his daughter a better chance. The insurance company had denied coverage for a new therapy that Dr. Martinez had recommended, and Michael was trying to figure out how they could possibly afford it on a construction worker's salary. Sarah arrived shortly after, carrying breakfast from home. Emma's favorite blueberry pancakes, made small enough for a child with a diminished appetite, but packed with all the love a mother could pour into a simple meal. "I had an idea last night," Sarah said as Emma picked at her breakfast. "What if we made that video you mentioned? We could record you singing one of George's songs and maybe share it with family and friends." Emma's eyes lit up with an excitement that Sarah hadn't seen in weeks. "Really, Mama? You mean it?" "I mean it," Sarah confirmed, though she was thinking more about creating a memory for their family than any grand gesture of reaching out to a country music superstar. Dr. Martinez arrived for morning rounds, her warm smile preceding her into the room. "How's our resident country star this morning?" "Dr. Martinez!" Emma exclaimed, sitting up straighter in bed. "Mama says we can make a video of me singing." The doctor's eyes met Sarah's over Emma's head, and she saw the complex mix of hope and heartbreak that had become all too familiar in the families she treated. "That sounds wonderful, Emma. Music therapy has shown remarkable benefits for patients with cystic fibrosis. The breathing control required for singing can actually help strengthen your respiratory muscles." After Dr. Martinez left, the family spent the morning preparing for their impromptu recording session. Michael tested his phone's camera quality. Sarah helped Emma brush her hair and choose her favorite pajamas, a pink set with small musical notes printed on them. And Emma practiced her song choice. "I want to sing I Cross My Heart," Emma decided. "It's the one that makes me feel strongest." As the afternoon light filtered through the hospital window, creating a natural spotlight across Emma's bed, Michael positioned his phone on the bedside table. Sarah sat beside Emma, ready to provide moral support, though she suspected her daughter wouldn't need it. "Ready, Princess?" Michael asked, his thumb hovering over the record button. Emma nodded, took as deep a breath as her compromised lungs would allow, and began to sing. What happened next would change their lives forever, though they had no way of knowing it at the time. Emma's voice, clear and strong despite her illness, filled the small hospital room with a emotion that seemed to transcend her 8 years. She sang as if her life depended on it, which in many ways it did. The song had become her anthem of hope, her declaration that love and faith could conquer even the darkest moments. "I cross my heart and promise to give all I've got to give to make all your dreams come true," she sang, her eyes closed, her small hands pressed against her heart. "In all the world, you'll never find a love as true as mine." When she finished, the room was silent, except for the quiet hum of medical equipment. Sarah wiped tears from her eyes, and Michael cleared his throat roughly, struggling to maintain his composure. "That was perfect, baby girl," he managed to say. "Absolutely perfect." As evening approached and the hospital settled into its nighttime routine, Sarah found herself staring at the video on Michael's phone. There was something magical about it, something that captured not just Emma's voice, but her spirit. The indomitable courage of a child facing impossible odds with grace and hope. "Michael," she said quietly, "I think we should share this." He looked at her questioningly. "With who?" "I don't know," she admitted, "but Emma put so much of herself into this song. Maybe other people need to hear it too." That night, after Emma had fallen asleep to the gentle sounds of George Strait's greatest hits playing softly in the background, Sarah made a decision that would ripple far beyond the walls of Vanderbilt Children's Hospital. She opened her Facebook account, typed a simple caption about her daughter's courage and love for George Strait's music, and uploaded the video. "My daughter Emma is 8 years old and has been fighting cystic fibrosis for most of her life," she wrote. "George Strait's music has given her strength during her darkest days. This is her singing his song, 'I Cross My Heart,' from her hospital bed. She dreams of meeting her hero someday. Please share if you think others might enjoy hearing her beautiful voice." She hesitated for only a moment before clicking share, then closed her phone and settled back into her uncomfortable hospital chair to watch over her sleeping daughter. Outside, Nashville continued its nightly rhythm, unaware that a small video was about to begin a journey that would touch hearts across the nation and eventually reach the ears of the king of country himself. The morning of October 15th began like any other at Vanderbilt Children's Hospital. Emma woke to the familiar sounds of morning rounds, the soft squeak of nurses' shoes on linoleum floors, the gentle beeping of monitors, and the distant conversations of medical staff beginning another day of caring for Nashville's youngest patients. She had no way of knowing that overnight her world had begun to change in ways she couldn't have imagined. Sarah Thompson stirred in her bedside chair, her neck stiff from another night of restless sleep in the hospital's makeshift accommodation for families. The morning light streaming through the window caught the screen of her phone, which had been buzzing intermittently throughout the night. Groggily, she reached for it, expecting to see the usual messages from family members checking on Emma's condition. Instead, her breath caught in her throat. Her Facebook notification showed numbers she'd never seen before. Dozens of shares, hundreds of comments, and a friend request count that seemed to be climbing by the minute. The video of Emma singing had been shared 847 times overnight, and the comments were pouring in from strangers across the country. "Michael," she whispered urgently, shaking her husband's shoulder. He had dozed off in the reclining chair the hospital provided for fathers, his large frame awkwardly positioned in the space designed for someone much smaller. "What is it?" he asked immediately, the instant alertness of a parent whose child is in crisis mode activated. "Is Emma okay?" "Emma's fine," Sarah assured him quickly, then held up her phone with trembling hands. "But look at this." Michael rubbed his eyes and focused on the screen. The numbers seemed impossible, and they were still growing. Comments from people they'd never met filled the screen. "This little angel has the voice of heaven, crying happy tears. What a brave little girl. God bless this sweet baby. I don't understand, Michael said, taking the phone and scrolling through the seemingly endless stream of responses. How did so many people see it? I think it's going viral, Sarah whispered, afraid to say the words too loudly, as if speaking them might somehow jinx this unexpected turn of events. Emma began to stir in her bed, her medication schedule ensuring that her sleep was often interrupted by the needs of her treatment. "Morning, Mama," she said softly, her voice still affected by the overnight breathing treatments, but carrying the gentle sweetness that had captivated so many strangers. "Morning, sweetheart," Sarah replied, quickly putting her phone away. She wasn't sure how to explain to an 8-year-old that she had become an overnight internet sensation. "How are you feeling today?" "Good," Emma replied, which in her vocabulary meant that she wasn't feeling worse than usual. She had learned not to complain about the constant discomfort, the difficulty breathing, or the fatigue that accompanied her daily battle with cystic fibrosis. "Can we sing again today?" Before Sarah could answer, Jennifer Walsh knocked on the doorframe and entered with a smile that seemed brighter than usual. "Good morning, Thompson family. Emma, I have to tell you something exciting." Jennifer had arrived at work to find the entire pediatric ward buzzing with excitement. One of the night shift nurses had seen the video of Emma singing and shared it with the staff. By morning, it had spread through the hospital's social media channels, and several local news stations had begun calling for interviews. "What is it, Miss Jennifer?" Emma asked, sitting up with interest. "Well, that beautiful video your parents made of you singing has been seen by thousands of people, and they all think you're absolutely amazing," Jennifer explained, her voice warm with genuine excitement for her young patient. Emma's eyes widened. "Thousands? Really?" "Really," Jennifer confirmed. "In fact, Channel 4 News wants to come and interview you about your love for George Strait's music. Would you like that?" The idea of being on television thrilled Emma in a way that made Sarah's heart both soar and ache. Her daughter, who had been robbed of so many normal childhood experiences, was about to have an adventure that most adults would find exciting. "Can I sing on TV?" Emma asked, her voice filled with hope. "I think that can be arranged," Jennifer said with a wink. Throughout the morning, the video continued to spread across social media platforms. Local country music radio stations began playing it during their shows, and several prominent Nashville musicians shared it on their own social media accounts. By noon, the video had been viewed over 50,000 times, and the number was climbing exponentially. Dr. Martinez arrived for her daily rounds to find the room buzzing with activity. "I hear we have a celebrity patient," she said with a warm smile. "Emma, how do you feel about all this attention?" "It's exciting," Emma replied honestly. "But I hope Mr. George sees it. That's what I really want." Dr. Martinez's expression grew thoughtful. As one of Nashville's leading pediatric pulmonologists, she had connections throughout the city's medical community, and she knew that several of her colleagues had treated members of the country music industry over the years. More importantly, she had seen how music therapy could be as powerful as any medication in treating young patients. "Emma," she said carefully, "I want you to know that regardless of what happens with this video, you've already accomplished something incredible. You've shown thousands of people what courage looks like, and you've brought joy to families who might be going through their own difficult times." That afternoon, the news crew from Channel 4 arrived at the hospital. Emma had never been more excited about anything in her life. Sarah had helped her put on her favorite dress, a blue one with small white flowers that brought out her eyes, and had even managed to curl her hair, though it was thinner now than it had been before her illness intensified. The reporter, Amanda Stevens, was a seasoned journalist who had covered countless human interest stories, but she found herself genuinely moved as she spoke with Emma. The 8-year-old's poise and wisdom seemed far beyond her years, yet her childlike hope and enthusiasm reminded everyone in the room of what was truly important in life. "Emma, Can you tell us why George Strait's music means so much to you? Amanda asked, her professional demeanor softened by genuine curiosity. Emma thought carefully before answering, her small hands folded in her lap. His songs make me feel strong, she said simply. When I'm scared or when the treatments hurt, I listen to his music and I remember that love is the most important thing. His songs are about love and family and being brave, and that's what I want to be, brave. The interview was broadcast that evening on the local news, but it didn't stop there. The segment was picked up by regional affiliates, then by national news networks. Emma's story, a young girl finding strength through music while battling a life-threatening illness, resonated with people across the country who were dealing with their own challenges. By the end of the week, Emma's video had been viewed over 2 million times. It had been shared by celebrities, politicians, and ordinary people who were touched by her story. The hashtag Emma's Hope began trending on social media, and donations started pouring in to help with her medical expenses. But the most significant development came on a Thursday evening, as Emma was settling in for another night at the hospital. Sarah was reading her a bedtime story when Jennifer Walsh appeared in the doorway, her face flushed with excitement and disbelief. "Sarah Michael," she said, her voice barely containing her excitement, "you need to take this call." She handed Sarah her cell phone, and on the other end was a voice that Sarah recognized immediately from years of listening to country music radio. "Mrs. Thompson," the voice said, warm and genuine, "this is George Strait. I understand you have a very special little girl who's been singing my songs." Sarah's hand flew to her mouth, and she almost dropped the phone. "Mr. Strait, is this really you?" "Yes, ma'am, it is," he replied, with the same humble sincerity that had made him beloved by millions of fans. "I saw Emma's video, and I have to tell you, I've been in the music business for over 40 years, and I've rarely heard anyone sing with as much heart as your daughter. She moved me to tears." Emma, who had been listening with growing excitement, began bouncing in her hospital bed. "Is that really Mr. George?" she whispered loudly. George Strait's laughter carried through the phone, a warm, genuine sound that filled the hospital room with joy. "Is that my little songbird I hear?" Sarah handed the phone to Emma, whose hands trembled as she held it to her ear. "Mr. George, it's really you?" "It's really me, darling," he replied, his voice gentle and kind. "I wanted to call and tell you how beautiful your singing is. You've got a gift, Emma, and not just for music. You've got a gift for touching people's hearts." Emma's eyes filled with happy tears. "Mr. George, your songs make me feel brave when I'm scared." "Well, sweetheart," George said, his own voice thick with emotion, "you've made me feel pretty brave too. In fact, I was wondering if you might like a visitor. I'm going to be in Nashville next week, and I'd love to come by and meet you in person. Would that be all right?" Emma's joyful scream could probably be heard throughout the entire pediatric ward. "Yes, yes, oh yes, please." As George Strait ended the call with promises to coordinate the visit through the hospital, Emma clutched her parents' hands with a strength that seemed to come from pure happiness. "He's coming to see me, Mama. Mr. George is coming to see me." That night, as Emma finally drifted off to sleep, she was smiling for the first time in months. Outside her window, Nashville's skyline twinkled with the same lights she'd wished upon just a week earlier. But now those wishes seemed to be coming true in ways she'd never dared to imagine. Sarah and Michael sat in the darkness, holding hands and watching their daughter sleep peacefully. They knew that the road ahead was still uncertain, that Emma's illness would continue to present challenges that would test their family's strength and resolve. But for the first time since the diagnosis, they felt something they'd almost forgotten: hope. The video that had started as a simple family moment had become something much larger, a reminder that music has the power to heal, that kindness can spread across the world in an instant, and that sometimes dreams really do come true. Emma's song had touched the heart of the king of country, and now he was coming to Nashville to meet the little girl whose courage had inspired him. As the night deepened and the hospital settled into its quiet rhythm, Emma's story continued to spread across the internet, touching hearts and inspiring hope in people facing their own battles. Her voice, carrying the timeless message of George Strait's music, had become a beacon of light for anyone who needed to believe that tomorrow could be better than today. The week leading up to George Strait's promised visit transformed not just Emma's hospital room, but the entire pediatric ward at Vanderbilt Children's Hospital. Word had spread through the medical staff, and nurses from other floors found reasons to stop by room 314, hoping to catch a glimpse of the little girl whose story had captured hearts across the nation. Emma's video had now surpassed 5 million views, and the donations to help with her medical expenses had reached an amount that left her parents speechless. People from all 50 states had sent cards, flowers, and small gifts. The hospital's mailroom had to establish a special protocol just to handle the volume of correspondence addressed to Emma Grace Thompson, Nashville's little country star. Dr. Martinez had become something of a media liaison for the family, fielding calls from news organizations while ensuring that Emma's medical care remained the top priority. "This level of attention is unprecedented," she confided to Sarah during one of their private conversations. "But I have to say, Emma's spirits have never been higher, and that's having a real impact on her physical well-being too." It was true. Emma's oxygen saturation levels had been more stable, her appetite had improved, and she had been sleeping better than she had in months. The anticipation of meeting her musical hero seemed to be providing the kind of healing that no medication could replicate. On the Monday morning before George Strait's scheduled Friday visit, Emma woke to find her room filled with flowers and balloons. The hospital had relaxed its usual restrictions on gifts, recognizing that this situation was extraordinary. Among the arrangements was a particularly beautiful bouquet of yellow roses, Texas's state flower, with a card that simply read, "From a fellow Texan who can't wait to meet you, George." "Mama, look!" Emma exclaimed, holding the card against her chest. "He sent me flowers." Sarah read the card over Emma's shoulder, her eyes misting with tears. The simple gesture showed a thoughtfulness that went beyond celebrity courtesy. This was a man who understood what his music meant to a sick little girl, and who cared enough to make sure she knew she wasn't forgotten. The week also brought unexpected visitors. Linda Davis, a country music artist who had heard Emma's story through the Nashville music community, stopped by on Tuesday with her guitar. She spent an hour with Emma, teaching her some of the finer points of breath control that professional singers used, techniques that coincidentally were excellent exercises for someone with cystic fibrosis. "You've got natural instincts that most singers spend years trying to develop," Linda told Emma as they worked on breathing exercises together. "Your illness has taught you to make every breath count, and that shows in your singing." On Wednesday, Emma received a call from the Make-A-Wish Foundation. While they couldn't officially grant her wish, since George Strait had already made it come true himself, they wanted to do something special for her. They arranged for her to record a professional version of "I Cross My Heart" in a real Nashville recording studio, complete with musical accompaniment. The trip to the studio was Emma's first time outside the hospital in 2 months. Despite the wheelchair and portable oxygen tank that had to accompany her, she was thrilled by the experience. The recording engineers were amazed by her natural ability to sing with emotion and technical skill despite her young age and physical challenges. "This little girl has something special," the studio owner, Marcus Johnson, told Sarah privately. "I've worked with platinum-selling artists who don't have the natural feel for music that Emma has." The professional recording of Emma's song was uploaded to the same social media accounts that had shared her original video. and it quickly gained another 1 million views. Country music radio stations across the nation began playing it, with DJs describing it as the most moving performance they'd ever heard. Meanwhile, George Strait was dealing with his own whirlwind of emotions and logistics. The 69-year-old country legend had been moved by countless stories throughout his career, but Emma's video had affected him in a way that surprised even his closest friends and family members. "There's something about that little girl," he confided to his longtime manager Tom Wilson as they planned the hospital visit. "She sings my songs like she understands every word, every emotion. She's been through more in 8 years than most people face in a lifetime, and yet there's such hope in her voice." George had decided that he wanted to do more than just visit Emma. He had been in contact with his friend and fellow musician, Alan Jackson, about organizing a benefit concert to help with Emma's medical expenses and to raise awareness about cystic fibrosis research. Several other major country artists had already agreed to participate, including Keith Whitley's widow, Lorrie Morgan, Brad Paisley, and Alison Krauss. The news of the planned benefit concert broke on Thursday morning, just 1 day before George's scheduled hospital visit. The announcement sent Emma's story viral once again, this time reaching international audiences. News outlets from Canada, the United Kingdom, and Australia picked up the story of the little girl whose hospital room singing had inspired some of country music's biggest stars to come together for a charitable cause. "Mr. George is doing a concert for me?" Emma asked in disbelief when her parents told her the news. She was sitting up in her hospital bed, coloring in a book that had been sent by one of her many new fans. A custom coloring book filled with images of musical notes, country music scenes, and inspirational messages. "Not just for you, sweetheart," Michael explained gently, "for all the children who are fighting the same battle you are. Your courage has inspired people to want to help other kids too." This concept seemed to resonate deeply with Emma. Throughout her illness, she had become friendly with other young patients in the pediatric ward, and she had seen firsthand how many families struggled with the financial and emotional burden of childhood illness. The idea that her story could help other children made her happier than any of the attention she had received for herself. That Thursday evening, as Emma prepared for what she expected to be the biggest day of her life, she received one more surprise. Dr. Martinez entered her room with a warm smile and an official-looking document. "Emma, I have some very good news," she announced. "Remember that new treatment we've been hoping your insurance would approve? Well, thanks to all the donations that have come in and some additional help from some very generous benefactors, we're going to be able to start that treatment next week." Sarah burst into tears of relief and gratitude. The experimental treatment could potentially slow the progression of Emma's disease and improve her quality of life significantly. It had been their greatest hope and their biggest worry. Hope because of its potential benefits, worry because of its prohibitive cost. "Does this mean I might get better?" Emma asked, her voice small but hopeful. "Doctor..." Martinez sat on the edge of the bed and took Emma's small hand in hers. "It means we're going to have new tools to help you fight this disease, sweetheart. You're already the strongest patient I've ever had, and now we're going to give you even better weapons in your battle." That night, Emma fell asleep, clutching the card from George Strait's flowers and wearing the biggest smile her parents had seen since before her diagnosis. Tomorrow, her hero was coming to visit, and for the first time in months, the future seemed full of possibilities rather than fears. In his hotel room across town, George Strait was having trouble sleeping too, but for different reasons. He had spent his career bringing joy to people through music, but he had never felt the weight of that responsibility more keenly than he did now. Tomorrow, he would meet a little girl who had found strength in his songs during the darkest period of her young life. He wanted to make sure that he lived up to the faith she had placed in him and his music. He had brought something special for Emma, not just an autograph or a poster, but something that he hoped would remind her every day that she was loved, that she was brave, and that her story had touched the heart of someone she had never met, but who now considered her one of the most important people in his life. As Friday morning dawned over Nashville, the stage was set for a meeting that would change both Emma and George in ways neither of them could have anticipated. The little girl who had sung her way into the heart of the King of Country was about to discover that heroes sometimes need inspiration too, and that the most powerful medicine isn't always found in a prescription bottle. Friday morning arrived with the crisp clarity that only October in Nashville can provide. The autumn air carried the scent of changing leaves and the promise of something extraordinary. At Vanderbilt Children's Hospital, room 314 had been transformed into something resembling a concert venue backstage area, with flowers, balloons, and cards creating a colorful tapestry of love and support from around the world. Emma had been awake since 5 in the morning, too excited to sleep. Sarah had helped her wash her hair and put on her favorite dress, the same blue one with white flowers she had worn for the television interview, but now it held special significance as her meeting George Strait dress. Despite the early hour and her usual morning fatigue, Emma's eyes sparkled with an energy that seemed to defy her medical condition. "Do I look okay, Mama?" Emma asked for the 10th time, smoothing down her dress and touching the small bow Sarah had put in her hair. "You look absolutely beautiful, sweetheart," Sarah assured her, though her own nerves were making her hands shake slightly as she applied a small amount of lip gloss to Emma's lips, a grown-up touch that made Emma feel special. Michael paced the small room, checking his watch every few minutes. As a construction foreman, he was used to coordinating complex schedules and managing logistics, but this was entirely different. How do you prepare to meet your daughter's hero? How do you thank someone who has agreed to bring joy to your child during the most difficult period of her life? Dr. Martinez arrived at 9 a.m. sharp, accompanied by Jennifer Walsh and several other nurses who had become part of Emma's extended hospital family. "How's our special patient this morning?" Dr. Martinez asked, though Emma's excitement was answer enough. "I can't sit still," Emma admitted with a giggle. "When is he coming? Is he really coming?" "He's really coming," Jennifer confirmed, having been in contact with George Strait's management team to coordinate the visit. "In fact, I just got word that his car is pulling into the hospital parking garage right now." Emma's squeal of delight could be heard down the hallway, bringing smiles to the faces of other patients, families, and medical staff who had been following her story throughout the week. At that moment, 3 floors below, George Strait was stepping out of a black SUV in the hospital's private parking area. At 69, he moved with the easy confidence of someone who had spent decades performing for crowds, but there was something different about his demeanor today. He seemed more thoughtful, more careful, as if he understood that this performance, if it could be called that, was perhaps the most important of his career. He was accompanied by his wife Norma, who had insisted on coming along after hearing Emma's story. "That little girl has been through more than any child should have to face," she had told her husband. "If my being there can bring her even a moment of additional happiness, then I want to be there." George carried a guitar case and a large gift bag, but the most important thing he brought was his genuine desire to spend time with a young fan who had reminded him why he had fallen in love with music in the first place. Emma's video had been a revelation to him, proof that music could still serve its most fundamental purpose of providing comfort, hope, and healing to those who needed it most. Hospital security had cleared a private route to the pediatric ward, not because George Strait requested special treatment, but because news crews and well-wishers had begun gathering outside the hospital as word of the visit spread. The last thing anyone wanted was for Emma's special day to be disrupted by the chaos that sometimes accompanied celebrity appearances. As the elevator carried George and Norma up to the third floor, he found himself more nervous than he had been before major concert performances. "What if I disappoint her?" he asked his wife quietly. Norma squeezed his hand reassuringly. "George, you've already given that little girl more happiness than she's felt in months. Just be yourself. That's who she fell in love with through your music." The elevator doors opened to reveal Dr. Martinez waiting in the hallway, her professional composure barely containing her own excitement. As a longtime country music fan herself, she had never imagined that her career would intersect with one of her musical heroes in such a meaningful way. "Mr. Strait, Mrs. Strait," she said, extending her hand. "I'm Dr. Elena Martinez, Emma's pulmonologist. Thank you so much for doing this. You have no idea what this means to her and her family." George shook her hand warmly. "Doctor, thank you for taking such good care of Emma. I've heard wonderful things about the treatment she's receiving here." As they walked down the hallway toward Emma's room, Dr. Martinez briefed George and Norma on what to expect. Emma's condition affects her breathing, so she may seem a bit fragile physically, but I want you to know that she's one of the strongest people I've ever met. Her spirit is absolutely indomitable. They paused outside room 314, where they could hear Emma's voice through the partially open door. She was singing softly, "Amarillo Morning," one of George's classic hits, her pure voice carrying the melody with a sweetness that made George's chest tighten with emotion. "She practices every day," Dr. Martinez whispered. "Music has become as important to her treatment as any medication we give her." George nodded, understanding more deeply than perhaps anyone else could the power that music held in Emma's life. He had spent his entire career witnessing music's ability to heal, to inspire, to bring people together. But he had never seen it demonstrated quite so powerfully as in the story of this young girl. Dr. Martinez knocked gently on the door. "Emma, are you ready for your special visitors?" The singing stopped immediately, replaced by an excited gasp and the sound of rustling bed sheets, as Emma presumably tried to position herself perfectly for the meeting she had been dreaming about all week. Yes, I'm ready," came Emma's voice, pitched higher with excitement than her usual soft tone. "Doctor." Martinez pushed the door open and stepped aside, allowing George and Norma to enter the room that had become the center of a story that had touched millions of hearts. Emma's reaction was everything that George had hoped for and more. Her blue eyes went wide with wonder, and her small hands flew to cover her mouth in disbelief. For a moment, she seemed frozen, as if she couldn't quite believe that her hero was actually standing in her hospital room. "Emma," George said gently, his voice carrying the same warmth that had made him beloved by generations of country music fans. "It's so wonderful to finally meet you." "Mr. George," Emma whispered, her voice barely audible. "It's really you." "It's really me, darling," he confirmed, moving slowly toward her bed so as not to overwhelm her. "And I brought someone special I'd like you to meet. This is my wife, Norma." Norma stepped forward with a gentle smile. "Hello, Emma. I've heard so much about you, and I've watched your beautiful videos so many times. You have the most lovely voice." Emma's paralysis broke and she burst into tears, not of sadness, but of pure joy and overwhelming emotion. "I can't believe you're here. I can't believe you're really here." Sarah and Michael, who had been watching from the corner of the room with tears streaming down their faces, stepped forward to introduce themselves. "Mr. Strait, I'm Sarah Thompson, Emma's mother," Sarah said, her voice thick with emotion. "And this is my husband, Michael. We can't thank you enough for this. You have no idea what this means to our family." George shook both their hands warmly. "The pleasure is all mine, I assure you. Your daughter has reminded me why I fell in love with music in the first place. She sings my songs with more heart than I've ever heard." Michael, who had been struggling to maintain his composure, finally spoke. "Mr. Strait, Emma has been fighting this disease for most of her life, and there have been days when we didn't know how to help her find the strength to keep going. Your music has been her anchor. When she sings your songs, she becomes a different person, stronger, braver, more hopeful. George turned back to Emma, who had wiped her tears and was now sitting up straighter in her bed, as if she wanted to present herself as the strong girl she believed she needed to be for her hero. "Emma," George said, settling into the chair beside her bed, "your mama and daddy are telling me that my music has helped you, but I have to tell you something. Your singing has helped me too. When I watched your video, it reminded me of something I sometimes forget after all these years in the music business. It reminded me that music isn't about fame or awards or selling records. It's about connecting with people, about sharing emotions and experiences that make us feel less alone in the world." Emma listened intently, her eyes never leaving George's face. "Your songs make me feel brave," she said simply. "When I'm scared about treatments or when I can't breathe very well, I sing your songs, and I remember that love is stronger than being scared." George felt his throat tighten with emotion. In all his years of performing, through all the accolades and achievements, he had never received a more meaningful review of his work than these simple words from an 8-year-old girl. "Well, darling," he said, reaching for his guitar case, "I was wondering if you might like to sing with me. I brought my guitar, and I thought maybe we could perform together." Emma's eyes lit up with an excitement that seemed to make the entire room brighter. "Really? You want to sing with me? I can't think of anything I'd rather do," George replied honestly, opening his guitar case and revealing the instrument that had been his companion for decades of music making. As George tuned his guitar, Emma's hospital room filled with the people who had become her extended family over the months of her treatment. Jennifer Walsh and several other nurses had been given permission to witness this special moment. And Dr. Martinez stood near the door, marveling at the healing power of what she was about to witness. "What song would you like to sing?" George asked Emma as he settled the guitar on his knee. "I Cross My Heart," Emma answered without hesitation. "It's my favorite because it's about promises and love, and it makes me feel strong." George smiled and began to play the opening chords of the song that had become Emma's anthem of hope. As the familiar melody filled the room, Emma closed her eyes for a moment, gathering her strength and her courage for what she knew would be the most important performance of her young life. When she opened her eyes and began to sing, her voice joined George's in perfect harmony. Their voices, his weathered by decades of experience and emotion, hers pure and hopeful despite her physical struggles, created something magical that transcended the sterile hospital environment and transformed Room 314 into a sacred space where music worked its most powerful medicine. "I cross my heart and promise to give all I've got to give to make all your dreams come true," they sang together, Emma's voice growing stronger with each line as she drew confidence from singing alongside her hero. Everyone in the room was moved to tears by the performance, but perhaps none more so than George himself. As he looked at this brave little girl singing beside him, he realized that she had given him a gift far greater than anything he could offer her. She had reminded him of the pure love that had first drawn him to music, the desire to touch hearts and heal souls through song. When the song ended, the room was silent, except for the gentle hum of Emma's medical equipment and the soft sounds of people trying to control their emotions. Emma looked at George with shining eyes, and for a moment, it seemed as if the harsh realities of her illness had disappeared entirely. "That was beautiful, Emma," George said softly. "You have a gift, sweetheart. Not just for singing, but for reminding people what's truly important in life." George reached into the gift bag he had brought and pulled out something that made Emma gasp with wonder. It was a custom-made guitar, sized perfectly for a child, with her name engraved in elegant script across the front. But more than that, it was autographed by George himself, with a message that would become Emma's most treasured possession. To Emma, your courage inspires me every day. Keep singing, keep dreaming, keep believing. Love, George Strait. This is for you, George said, placing the small guitar gently in Emma's arms. I want you to keep making music, Emma. The world needs voices like yours. Emma held the guitar as if it were made of precious gems, her small fingers tracing the engraved letters of her name. It's the most beautiful thing I've ever seen, she whispered. But George wasn't finished. From his jacket pocket, he pulled out a small, wrapped package. I have one more thing for you, he said. This belonged to my daughter, Jennifer, who passed away some years ago. She would have been about your age when she owned this, and I think she would have wanted you to have it. Emma unwrapped the package with trembling fingers to reveal a small silver necklace with a musical note pendant. It was simple but elegant, and the weight of its significance was not lost on anyone in the room. She loved music too, George said gently, his voice thick with emotion, as he spoke about his daughter who had died tragically in a car accident years earlier. And she had the same kind of brave heart that you have. I know she would have loved your singing. Sarah stepped forward to help Emma put on the necklace, and as the silver musical note settled against Emma's chest, it seemed to complete something. Not just the outfit, but the connection between a grieving father, a sick little girl, and the music that had brought them together. The visit continued for another hour, with George and Emma singing several more songs together, while Norma chatted with Sarah and Michael about the challenges and joys of parenting. George shared stories from his career, and Emma told him about her dreams of someday performing on the Grand Ole Opry stage, a dream that after this day no longer seemed impossible. As the afternoon wore on, it became clear that this was more than just a celebrity hospital visit. It was a meeting of souls, a connection between two people who had found in each other exactly what they needed. George found a reminder of music's pure purpose, and Emma found validation that her dreams were not too big, her hopes not too impossible. When it came time for George and Norma to leave, Emma was clearly struggling with the emotions of saying goodbye to someone who had become so important to her. "Will I see you again?" she asked, her voice small but hopeful. George knelt beside her bed and took her small hand in his much larger ones. "Emma, I promise you that this is not goodbye. You're part of my family now, and family takes care of each other. I'm going to make sure you get the best medical care available, and I'm going to keep in touch with you and your parents every step of the way." He paused, seeming to make a decision. "In fact, I want you to be my special guest at the benefit concert we're organizing. If your doctors say it's okay, I'd love for you to join me on stage and sing for all the people who have been inspired by your story." Emma's reaction was immediate and joyful. "Really? On a real stage, with you?" "With me," George confirmed. "We're a team now, Emma, partners in making beautiful music." As George and Norma prepared to leave, Emma called out one last time, "Mr. George? Thank you for making my dreams come true." George turned back, his eyes bright with unshed tears. "Thank you, darling, for reminding me what dreams are for." After they left, Emma lay in her hospital bed, clutching her new guitar and touching the necklace at her throat. The room still seemed to shimmer with the magic of what had just occurred, and everyone present knew they had witnessed something truly extraordinary. "How do you feel, sweetheart?" Sarah asked, settling back into her familiar chair beside Emma's bed. Emma was quiet for a long moment, processing the overwhelming emotions of the day. When she finally spoke, her voice was filled with a peace and contentment that her parents hadn't heard since before her diagnosis. "I feel like everything is going to be okay," she said simply. "I feel like I'm not fighting alone anymore." And as the sun set over Nashville that evening, casting long shadows through the hospital windows, Emma Grace Thompson fell asleep, holding her guitar and wearing the necklace that connected her to a musical legend who had become her guardian angel. Her dreams that night were filled with stages and lights and crowds of people singing along to songs of hope and love and the unbreakable bonds that music creates between hearts that have never met but somehow understand each other perfectly. 3 weeks had passed since George Strait's visit to Vanderbilt Children's Hospital, but the impact of that day continued to ripple through Emma's life and the lives of everyone who had been touched by her story. The benefit concert, officially titled Songs of Hope, a benefit for cystic fibrosis research, was scheduled for the following Saturday at the Grand Ole Opry House, and anticipation was building throughout Nashville and beyond. Emma's condition had shown remarkable improvement since beginning the new experimental treatment that the donations had made possible. Dr. Martinez was cautiously optimistic about her progress, noting that Emma's lung function tests had improved by 15%, a significant development that spoke to both the effectiveness of the new therapy and the healing power of hope itself. "I've been practicing medicine for 20 years, Dr. Martinez confided to Sarah during one of their regular consultations, and I've learned that a patient's emotional and mental state can have a profound impact on their physical recovery. Emma's spirits have been so high since Mr. Strait's visit that I believe it's actually contributing to her medical improvement." Emma had been moved from the intensive care unit to a regular pediatric room, and for the first time in months, there was talk of her being able to go home soon, at least for short periods between treatments. The prospect of sleeping in her own bed, of seeing her friends from school, of returning to some semblance of normal childhood activities, filled Emma with an excitement that was almost as therapeutic as any medication. The small guitar that George had given her had become her constant companion. Despite her small hands and limited strength, she practiced diligently every day, working through the basic chords that Jennifer Walsh had helped her learn during the long afternoon hours between medical procedures. Her renditions of George Strait songs had become a highlight for other patients in the pediatric ward, and several children had requested that she perform for them during their own difficult treatment days. "She's become our little ambassador of hope," Jennifer observed to the other nurses during their shift change. Other kids see Emma fighting her battle with such grace and courage, and it gives them strength for their own struggles. The story of Emma's journey had continued to spread far beyond Nashville. International news outlets had picked up the story, and country music fans from around the world had begun sending cards, letters, and small gifts. The hospital's mailroom had established a dedicated system just for handling Emma's correspondence, and reading the messages had become a daily activity that brought joy not just to Emma, but to her parents as well. One particularly moving letter had come from a teenage girl in Australia who was also fighting cystic fibrosis. "Dear Emma," she had written, "watching your video made me feel less alone in my battle. Your courage has inspired me to start singing again, something I had given up when I got sicker. Thank you for reminding me that music can heal hearts even when bodies are struggling." Letters like this one helped Emma understand that her story had become bigger than her own experience. She was representing hope for children and families around the world who were facing similar challenges, and this responsibility, rather than overwhelming her, seemed to give her additional strength and purpose. George Strait had kept his promise to stay in touch with Emma and her family. He called every few days, sometimes just to chat about music, sometimes to check on her medical progress, and sometimes simply to hear her sing. These conversations had become precious to both Emma and George, creating a bond that transcended the typical relationship between a celebrity and a fan. During one of their phone calls, George had shared some exciting news. "Emma, I've been talking to some folks at the record label, and they're interested in recording a professional album of you singing some of my songs. The proceeds would go towards cystic fibrosis research, and it would give your voice a chance to reach even more people who might need to hear your message of hope. Emma's response had been characteristically thoughtful. Would it help other kids like me? It would help a lot of other kids like you, George had assured her. Then I want to do it, Emma had said without hesitation. The announcement of Emma's upcoming album, tentatively titled Songs from the Heart, had generated even more media attention and had pre-sold thousands of copies before a single song had been recorded. Country music critics were calling it the most anticipated album of the year, not because of any commercial potential, but because of the human story behind the music. As the date of the benefit concert approached, Emma's excitement was tempered by a nervousness that was entirely understandable. She had never performed in front of a large audience, and the Grand Ole Opry House held special significance in country music history. Every major country star had performed on that stage, and the thought of joining that legacy was both thrilling and intimidating for an 8-year-old girl. "What if I forget the words?" Emma confided to her parents during one of their evening conversations. "What if my voice doesn't work right? What if I disappoint everyone?" Michael sat on the edge of her bed and took her small hands in his large, calloused ones. "Princess, you could never disappoint anyone. You've already given people more hope and joy than most performers give in their entire careers. Just remember what Mr. George told you. It's not about being perfect. It's about sharing your heart." Sarah added her own reassurance. "Sweetheart, everyone who will be in that audience already loves you. They're not coming to judge your performance. They're coming to celebrate your courage and to support other children who are fighting the same battle you are." The week of the concert brought a flurry of activity. Emma had been discharged from the hospital for the first time in 2 months, allowing her to spend a few days at home preparing for her performance. The simple act of sleeping in her own bed, surrounded by her familiar toys and books, seemed to restore some of the childhood innocence that her illness had temporarily overshadowed. Rehearsals for the concert were held at the Opry House, giving Emma a chance to become comfortable with the stage and the acoustics. The first time she walked onto that famous wooden stage, she was overwhelmed by the history and significance of the moment. "This is where all the greatest country singers have performed," she whispered to George as they stood together at center stage, looking out at the empty seats that would soon be filled with 3,000 people. "And now it's where Emma Grace Thompson will perform," George replied. "You belong here, darling. Your voice and your story are just as important as anyone who has ever stood on this stage." The rehearsal went smoothly, with Emma gaining confidence as she worked through her planned performance with George and the backing musicians. They had chosen to perform "I Cross My Heart" together, followed by Emma singing "Amarillo Morning Solo," a song that showcased her voice beautifully and had become another of her signature pieces during her hospital stay. The night before the concert, Emma's extended hospital family gathered at the Thompson home for a small dinner party. Dr. Martinez, Jennifer Walsh, and several other nurses who had become like family to Emma came to wish her well and to celebrate how far she had come in her journey. 6 months ago, we were fighting just to keep Emma stable, Dr. Martinez reflected during the dinner. Now look at her. She's about to perform at the Grand Ole Opry. It's a medical miracle. But more than that, it's a testament to the power of the human spirit and the healing properties of hope and love. That evening, as Emma prepared for bed, she found herself reflecting on the incredible journey that had brought her to this moment. Just a few months earlier, she'd been a sick little girl whose world had been reduced to hospital rooms and medical procedures. Now, she was about to perform on one of the most famous stages in American music. Her story had inspired millions of people around the world, and she had formed a friendship with her musical hero that had changed both of their lives. "Mama," Emma said, as Sarah tucked her into her own bed for the first time in months. "I keep thinking about all the kids who are still in the hospital tonight. I wish they could all be at the concert tomorrow." Sarah's heart swelled with pride at her daughter's compassion. Even in the midst of her own extraordinary experience, Emma's thoughts were with other children who were facing similar struggles. "You know what, sweetheart?" Sarah said. "Mr. George told me that they're going to broadcast the concert live on television and the internet, so kids in hospitals all over the world will be able to watch you perform. Your voice is going to reach children who need hope just like you did." This seemed to satisfy Emma, and she drifted off to sleep, holding her small guitar and touching the necklace that George had given her, the necklace that connected her to a musical legacy and to a man who had become like a grandfather to her. Saturday, November 4th, dawned clear and crisp in Nashville. The Grand Ole Opry House was buzzing with activity as sound technicians, lighting crews, and stage managers prepared for what many were calling the most emotionally significant concert in the venue's history. The guest list read like a who's who of country music, with major stars having flown in from across the country to participate in the benefit. Emma spent the morning at home, trying to maintain some normalcy before the evening's performance. She practiced her songs one final time, had lunch with her parents, and took a nap to ensure she would have enough energy for the evening ahead. As afternoon turned to evening, the Thompson family made their way to the Opry House. Emma wore a beautiful white dress that had been specially made for the occasion, with small musical notes embroidered around the hem, a gift from the country music community that had embraced her as one of their own. Backstage at the Opry House, Emma was surrounded by some of the biggest names in country music, all of whom treated her with the respect and affection typically reserved for veteran performers. Brad Paisley taught her a few guitar techniques, Alison Krauss worked with her on breath control, and Lori Morgan shared stories about performing that helped calm Emma's pre-show nerves. "The secret," Lori told Emma as they sat together in the dressing room, "is to remember that everyone in that audience is rooting for you. They want you to succeed, they want to hear your beautiful voice, and they want to be part of your story." George Strait arrived an hour before the show was scheduled to begin, and his presence immediately calmed Emma's remaining anxieties. He had become her anchor, her source of strength and confidence, and seeing him in his familiar black cowboy hat and boots reminded her that she wasn't facing this moment alone. "How are you feeling, darling?" he asked, kneeling down to her eye level as he had done during their first meeting at the hospital. "I'm nervous," Emma admitted honestly, "but I'm excited too. I keep thinking about all the kids who are going to watch tonight, and I want to sing good for them." "You're going to sing beautifully," George assured her. "Just remember what we practiced, listen to the music, and sing from your heart. That's all you've ever done, and it's worked pretty well so far." As showtime approached, Emma could hear the crowd gathering in the auditorium. 3,000 people had bought tickets for the benefit concert, with proceeds going to cystic fibrosis research and to help families dealing with childhood illnesses. But more than the ticket sales, the concert was being broadcast live on multiple television networks and streaming platforms, potentially reaching millions of viewers around the world. The show began with a series of performances by established country music stars, each taking the stage to perform songs that celebrated hope, family, and the power of music to heal. The audience was enthusiastic and emotional, understanding that they were part of something much larger than a typical concert. Finally, as the evening reached its climax, George Strait took the stage alone to introduce the person everyone had come to see. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, his voice carrying easily to every corner of the historic venue, "a few months ago I received a phone call that changed my life. It was about a little girl in a Nashville hospital who had been singing my songs to help her through some very difficult times. When I saw the video of Emma Grace Thompson singing 'I Cross My Heart' from her hospital bed, It reminded me why I fell in love with music in the first place. The audience was completely silent, hanging on every word. Emma has taught me, and she's taught all of us, that music isn't about fame or fortune or awards. Music is about connecting hearts, sharing hope, and reminding each other that we're not alone in our struggles. Tonight, Emma is going to share her gift with all of you, and I guarantee that you're going to hear something special. Not just a beautiful voice, but a beautiful soul. George paused, looking toward the side of the stage where Emma waited with her parents. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome a very brave young lady, my friend and singing partner, Miss Emma Grace Thompson. Emma walked onto the stage with careful, measured steps, her small form dwarfed by the grandeur of the Opry House, but her presence somehow filling every corner of the venue. The audience rose to their feet in spontaneous applause that lasted nearly 2 minutes, a standing ovation for courage, for hope, and for the power of music to transform lives. When the applause finally subsided, Emma took her place beside George at center stage. He picked up his guitar and looked at her with an encouraging smile. "You ready, partner?" he asked, his voice picked up by the stage microphones. "I'm ready," Emma replied, her voice clear and strong despite her nervousness. George began the opening chords of "I Cross My Heart," and Emma's voice joined his in the song that had started their incredible journey together. As they sang, something magical happened in the Grand Ole Opry House. The usual barriers between performer and audience dissolved, and everyone present became part of a shared emotional experience that transcended entertainment and became something closer to a spiritual awakening. Emma's voice, pure and honest and filled with the wisdom that comes from facing life's greatest challenges with grace, carried George's words with a power that moved the entire audience to tears. When they reached the chorus, "I cross my heart and promise to give all I've got to give to make all your dreams come true," it felt less like a song and more like a prayer. A promise between two souls who had found exactly what they needed in each other. When the duet ended, George stepped back to allow Emma to perform Amarillo Morning Solo. This was her moment, her chance to show the world the strength and beauty that had sustained her through months of illness and uncertainty. As Emma sang about morning light and the promise of a new day, her voice seemed to carry every hope, every dream, every prayer that had been offered on her behalf by strangers around the world who had been touched by her story. The audience was completely silent, except for the occasional sound of someone trying to control their emotions. And by the time Emma reached the final notes of the song, there wasn't a dry eye in the house. The applause that followed was thunderous, lasting nearly 5 minutes, as the audience expressed their appreciation not just for Emma's performance, but for her courage, her spirit, and her reminder that the most powerful medicine is often found not in a prescription bottle, but in the connections we make with each other through shared experiences of hope and love. As Emma took her bow alongside George Strait on the stage of the Grand Ole Opry, she looked out at the audience and saw something that would stay with her for the rest of her life. She saw 3,000 people who had been brought together by music, by compassion, and by the belief that one small voice could make a difference in the world. Later that evening, as the concert wound down and the various performers gathered backstage to congratulate Emma on her performance, she received the news that would cap off the most extraordinary day of her young life. Dr. Martinez, who had been watching the concert from the audience, approached Emma and her parents with a smile that seemed to light up the entire backstage area. "Emma," she said, kneeling down to the little girl's eye level, "I just got the results of your latest tests, and I have some wonderful news. Your lung function has improved by another 10% since you started the new treatment. At this rate of improvement, you're going to be able to live a much more normal life than we ever dared to hope." Emma's response was characteristically thoughtful. "Does that mean other kids with CF might get better too?" It means that the research being funded by tonight's concert might help develop even better treatments for other children, Dr. Martinez confirmed. Your story isn't just helping you, Emma. It's helping kids you'll never meet, in places you'll never visit, because people were inspired by your courage to support medical research. As the evening wound down and the Thompson family prepared to return home, George Strait pulled Emma aside for a private moment. "Emma," he said, "I want you to know that meeting you has been one of the greatest privileges of my life. You've reminded me of everything I love about music, and you've shown me what real courage looks like." Emma hugged her hero, this man who had become so much more than a celebrity she admired. "Thank you for making my dreams come true, Mr. George." "Thank you for making mine come true too, darling," he replied. "And remember, this is just the beginning of your story. You've got a gift, and the world needs to hear what you have to say." As the Thompson family drove home through the quiet Nashville streets that night, Emma fell asleep in the back seat of their car, still wearing her performance dress and clutching the small guitar that had become her most treasured possession. In her dreams, she was singing on stages around the world, sharing messages of hope and healing with children who needed to hear that they weren't alone in their battles. The benefit concert raised over $2 million for cystic fibrosis research and support for families dealing with childhood illnesses. Emma's album, Songs from the Heart, would go on to become one of the best-selling country albums of the year, with all proceeds supporting medical research and patient care. But perhaps more importantly, Emma Grace Thompson's story had reminded the world that music has the power to heal, that courage can be found in the smallest packages, and that sometimes the most profound wisdom comes from the pure hearts of children who understand, better than adults ever could, what truly matters in life. In the months and years that followed, Emma would continue her medical treatment, continue to sing, and continue to inspire people around the world with her story of hope, healing, and the transformative power of music. Her friendship with George Strait would endure, growing into a mentorship that would help guide her as she navigated both her health challenges and her emerging career as a performer. The little girl who had sung herself into the heart of the King of Country had become something even more precious, a living reminder that music is medicine, that hope is healing, and that sometimes the most beautiful songs come from the bravest hearts.